Can you imagine a world without hamburgers, without milkshakes, without those gleaming diners with red leather booths and jukeboxes playing rock and roll? That world existed, and the transformation that brought us the menu we now consider classic American was a silent revolution built by hungry immigrants, exhausted workers, and visionary entrepreneurs who bet everything on a crazy idea, selling fast, cheap, and delicious food to the masses. This is the story of how a simple 5-cent sandwich forever changed the way the world eats. And at the center of this revolution was a family you've never heard of, but whose story represents thousands of others who built the American dream, one hamburger at a time. If you love stories that reveal the origins of what we take for granted, subscribe to this channel now and hit the notification bell. What you're about to discover will change the way you look at every diner you ever visit. Providence, Rhode Island, 1887. Giuseppe Moretti was 23 years old when he stepped off the ship that brought him from Naples to America. He carried a cardboard suitcase tied with twine, $17 sewn into his coat lining, and a dream he shared with millions of other immigrants: a better life. What he didn't know was that his destiny was linked not to the textile factories that employed most newly arrived Italians, but to something far more revolutionary. America in 1887 was a country in rapid transformation. Cities grew at a dizzying pace, fed by endless waves of immigrants and an industrialization that seemed to have no limits. Factories operated in 3 shifts, workers slept in overcrowded tenements, and a new reality was emerging: thousands of people working at hours when no traditional restaurant was open. Giuseppe found work in a tool factory that operated from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. The work was brutal, but it paid $3 a week, enough to share a room with 4 other men and send a few cents to his family in Italy. The problem was hunger. When his shift ended at 6 in the morning, there was nowhere to eat. Restaurants opened at 8 or 9. Boarding houses served breakfast too early or too late. Night workers were invisible to the commerce of the era. It was on one of these hungry early mornings that Giuseppe first saw a lunch wagon. It was a curious sight: a horse-drawn wagon pulled by a tired horse, parked on the corner of Westminster and Dorrance streets. The wagon had been adapted to look like a small kitchen on wheels, with an improvised counter where a man in an apron sold coffee, pies, and simple sandwiches to workers leaving the factories. The owner's name was Walter Scott, and although Giuseppe didn't know it at the time, he was looking at the father of all American diners. Walter Scott had started his business in 1872, selling sandwiches wrapped in newspaper to employees of the Providence Journal. When he realized there was a huge market of night workers with no food options, he adapted a wagon to serve hot food on the streets. It was primitive, uncomfortable, and completely revolutionary. Giuseppe approached and ordered a coffee with a ham sandwich. It cost 10 cents. The coffee was too strong. The sandwich was just 2 slices of bread with a sliver of meat, but it was hot, it was affordable, and it was available at 6 in the morning when he needed it. As he ate standing up, leaning against the wagon, Giuseppe watched Walter Scott work. The man was efficient, friendly, and clearly earned more in one night than Giuseppe earned in a week at the factory. The idea planted a seed that would take years to germinate. In the following months, Giuseppe became a regular customer of the lunch wagon. He met other night workers: Irish from the port construction, Germans from the breweries, Poles from the foundries, all with the same story, all chasing the same dream, all fed by those improvised wagons, multiplying on the corners of Providence. The lunch wagon business grew, and with it, the competition. New entrepreneurs appeared every week, each trying to differentiate themselves. Some offered benches for customers to sit on. Others installed small awnings for rain protection. The most ambitious began building larger wagons, more elaborate, true mobile kitchens with coal stoves and an increasing variety of items. The menu of these first lunch wagons was simple, dictated by practicality and the workers' budgets. Coffee at 5 cents was the best-selling item, strong enough to keep awake those who had worked all night. Apple pies, made at home by the owners' wives, cost between 5 and 10 cents depending on size. Sandwiches ranged from basic ham with bread for 10 cents to more elaborate combinations with cheese or eggs for 15. But the item that would begin to define the identity of the American diner had not yet arrived: the hamburger. Giuseppe worked at the factory for 3 years, saving every cent he could. In 1890 he married Maria, a Sicilian immigrant he met at an Italian community celebration. She worked as a seamstress in a clothing factory, and together they earned enough income to rent a small apartment of their own. It was Maria who first suggested the idea that would change their lives. "Why don't you do the same as the man with the wagon? she asked one night, while Giuseppe complained about back pain from factory work. "You know how to cook. I know how to make pies. We can sell to the workers." Giuseppe laughed at the suggestion initially. They didn't have money to buy a wagon. They had no business experience. They didn't speak English fluently. But the idea persisted, growing in his mind like a stubborn plant that refuses to die. In 1892, after 2 years of strict savings and sacrifices, Giuseppe bought his first used wagon for $45. It was old, needed repairs, and barely fit 2 people inside, but it was his. He and Maria spent 3 months renovating the wagon. Giuseppe used his skills learned at the factory to build a wooden counter and install a small coal stove. Maria sewed curtains for the windows and painted the exterior in a vibrant green that stood out from other wagons. They called the business Moretti's Night Lunch, a name that mixed Italian pride with American practicality. The inaugural menu was modest: coffee, tea, 3 types of sandwiches, apple pie, and meat pie. Prices were competitive, ingredients fresh, and Maria's Italian seasoning gave a different flavor that other lunch wagons didn't have. The first months were difficult. Competition was fierce, customers suspicious of an Italian selling American food, and money barely covered costs. Giuseppe almost gave up several times, but Maria, with her Sicilian stubbornness, refused to accept defeat. "We need something different," she would say, "something no one else has." The answer came from an unexpected place, a German customer named Heinrich, who worked at a brewery and frequented Moretti's every night. "In Germany," Heinrich told them one night, "we have a food called hamburg steak. It's ground meat seasoned, served raw, or cooked. Very popular in Hamburg." Giuseppe was curious. Ground meat was cheap, easy to prepare, and could be served in many ways. The following week, he experimented with creating his own version: a portion of ground meat seasoned with salt, pepper, and a touch of Italian garlic, grilled on the coal stove and served between 2 slices of bread. The first hamburg sandwich at Moretti's was sold in March 1893 for 15 cents. It wasn't an immediate success. Customers looked suspiciously at that dark meat between bread. Some complained they preferred ham. Others questioned the quality of ground meat, associated at the time with scraps and butcher leftovers. But gradually, the sandwich found its audience. Workers discovered it was more substantial than cold-cut sandwiches, more satisfying, more comforting on a cold Rhode Island night. Giuseppe's seasoning, different from what other lunch wagons offered, created a loyal customer base who came specifically for the Italian's hamburg. What Giuseppe did not know was that he was participating in a culinary revolution happening simultaneously in dozens of American cities. In Connecticut, Louis Lasson served ground meat sandwiches at his lunch wagon. In Ohio, brothers experimented with their own versions. In Wisconsin, fare vendors created local variations. Nobody knows exactly who made the first American hamburger, because dozens of people had the same idea at the same time, responding to the same need: cheap and accessible protein for hungry workers. By 1895, Moretti's night lunch had grown enough for Giuseppe to quit his factory job. He and Maria operated the wagon together, in shifts that started at 10 at night and ended at 7 in the morning. The menu had expanded to include fried eggs, bacon, more varieties of pies, and of course, the hamburg sandwich that had become the flagship. But wagons had limitations. They were small, uncomfortable, exposed to the weather. Customers ate standing up, on the street, balancing plates and cups in their hands. Giuseppe dreamed of something bigger, something permanent, something that would offer dignity to the workers he fed every night. The dream began to take shape when he heard about a new trend in Worcester, Massachusetts: stationary lunch wagons that were so elaborate they looked like small train cars. They had fixed benches, marble counters, and were connected to water and sewer systems. They were no longer mobile wagons. They were permanent establishments disguised as vehicles. Giuseppe traveled to Worcester to see with his own eyes. What he found left him speechless. The Worcester lunch wagon was a work of art in wood and metal. It had an elongated shape, like a Pullman train car, with large windows showing the illuminated interior. Red leather upholstered benches lined a curved white marble counter. Behind the counter, modern stoves, ice refrigerators, and shelves organized with ingredients. The floor was tile, the walls lined with polished wood, and electric lamps replaced candles and lanterns. It was the future, and Giuseppe wanted to be part of it. He returned to Providence with his head buzzing with plans. He calculated costs, drew projects, negotiated with manufacturers. In 1898, after 3 years of savings and a risky loan from the local bank, Giuseppe Moretti opened the first fixed diner in Providence, Moretti's Diner, installed on land purchased in the industrial area of the city. The new establishment's menu kept the lunch wagon classics but expanded to items only possible with a real kitchen: scrambled eggs, omelets, pancakes for breakfast, homemade soups, stews, daily specials for lunch, and the hamburg sandwich, now served with French fries that Maria learned to make crispy like no one else. The term diner didn't officially exist yet. People called these establishments lunch cars, night owls, or simply eating houses. But the format was defined: elongated counter, seats for customers, open kitchen where they could see their food being prepared. It was democratic, accessible, unpretentious. Anyone could enter, sit next to anyone else, eat the same food. There were no reserved tables, no dress code, no discrimination by class or appearance. It was the essence of the American dream served on a plate. Are you enjoying this journey through American diner history? Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. In the next chapter, you'll discover how the simple menu of these first diners evolved to become the classic menu we know today, and how a new generation of Morettis witnessed the greatest food revolution of the 20th century. The 20th century arrived with the promise of transformation, and American diners were at the center of this change. Anthony Moretti, son of Giuseppe and Maria, was born in 1896, 3 years before the turn of the century. He grew up inside Moretti's diner, learning to crack eggs before learning to read, knowing regular customers by name before knowing his schoolmates. For him, the marble counter was the center of the universe, and the smell of coffee and bacon was the perfume of home. When Anthony was 10 years old in 1906, Moretti's menu had already evolved considerably since the lunch wagon days. Breakfast included eggs prepared 6 different ways: pancakes with maple syrup, crispy bacon, sausages, and the hash browns Maria had perfected over the years. Lunch offered varied sandwiches, daily soups, and the famous hamburg sandwiches that now represented 30% of sales. But it was around this time that an innovation began appearing in diners across America: the printed menu. Until then, most establishments advertised their items on handwritten boards, or simply relied on servers who recited options from memory. Giuseppe initially resisted the idea of a printed menu, considering it an unnecessary expense. But Anthony, already showing the entrepreneurial spirit he inherited from his father, insisted. "Dad, customers want to see the options. They want to know prices before ordering. It's more modern." Giuseppe relented, and in 1907 Moretti's Diner printed its first official menu on cardstock. It was a single sheet, folded in half, with items organized by category and prices clearly indicated. The design was simple but included a small illustration of the diner at the top and the motto Maria had created: good food, fair prices, honest people. The 1907 menu is a fascinating record of what Americans ate in this era of transition. Breakfast listed: 2 eggs with bacon for 15 cents, 2 eggs with sausage for 15 cents, pancakes with butter and syrup for 10 cents, toast with jam for 5 cents, and coffee for 5 cents. Lunch included ham sandwich for 10 cents, cheese sandwich for 10 cents, hamburg sandwich for 15 cents, soup of the day for 10 cents, and apple pie for 5 cents. But the next 20 years would bring changes that would transform this simple menu into the classic menu we recognize today. The first major innovation was the round hamburger bun. Until 1910, the hamburg sandwich was served between 2 slices of regular loaf bread, the same bread used for any other sandwich. It was practical but not ideal. The bread would fall apart with the meat juices, the edges would get soggy, and it was hard to hold without making a mess. The solution came from a local bakery that began producing round buns, specifically for hamburgers. They were smaller, denser, lightly toasted on the inner surfaces to resist moisture. When Anthony tried serving hamburgers in this new format, the difference was immediate. Customers could hold the sandwich with one hand, the presentation was more appetizing, and the eating experience was dramatically better. Moretti's was one of the first diners in Providence to adopt the round hamburger bun as standard. Other establishments quickly followed. Within a few years, the mental image of the American hamburger was defined: round meat, round bun. Perfect combination. The second revolution was the addition of condiments and toppings. In the early years, the hamburg sandwich was served plain, meat and bread, nothing more. Customers who wanted to add mustard or ketchup had to ask separately, and not all establishments offered them. It was only after 1915 that condiments began to be incorporated as a standard part of the sandwich. Ketchup, which had existed for decades but was considered a relatively premium product, became more accessible with mass production. Yellow mustard, cheaper, was already common. Pickled cucumbers, German influence, began appearing as accompaniments, and onions, raw or grilled, added flavor without adding much cost. Anthony, experimenting in the kitchen he now ran alongside his aging father, was one of the pioneers of what he called the complete hamburger: meat, melted cheese, lettuce, tomato, onion, pickles, ketchup, and mustard. It was a more expensive item, sold for 25 cents, but it offered a complete experience that no simple sandwich could match. Cheese on the hamburger was an addition that met initial resistance. Many considered it strange to mix cheese with beef, but when customers discovered the pleasure of cheese melting over hot meat, creating that creamy texture that perfectly complemented the protein, the cheeseburger was born and never left the menu. The third transformation was the French fry. French fries existed in America since the 19th century, but were considered a side dish for elegant restaurants, cut thin in the French style and served in small portions. It was in the diners of the 1910s and 1920s that French fries were democratized and transformed into the definitive accompaniment to the hamburger. Maria Moretti, already elderly but still active in the kitchen, developed her own French fry technique. She cut the potatoes into thicker sticks than the French standard, fried twice to ensure external crispiness and internal softness, and salted generously while still hot. The result was addictive. The secret, she would tell younger employees, is love and very hot oil. Moretti's French fries became famous in Providence. Customers came specifically for them, ordering extra portions to take home. When Anthony made the hamburger and fries combo an official menu item, sales skyrocketed. It was convenient, satisfying, and offered greater perceived value than buying items separately. The fourth innovation was the beverage that would define the American diner forever, the milkshake. Milk-based drinks had existed since the late 19th century, but were prepared manually and varied enormously in quality. The revolution came in 1922, when Hamilton Beach launched the commercial electric mixer, a machine that blended milk and ice cream in seconds, creating a creamy and consistent texture impossible to achieve manually. Anthony invested $50 in one of the first Hamilton Beach mixers available in Rhode Island. It was a significant expense for the time, but the return was immediate. Vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry milkshakes became an instant sensation, especially among younger customers. The 1925 menu at Moretti's reflected these transformations. The complete hamburger cost 30 cents, the cheeseburger 35, the hamburger and fries combo 40 cents, milkshakes cost 15 cents, sodas 10. Breakfast remained popular, but lunch now dominated sales. The 1920s also brought a fundamental cultural change, the rise of the automobile. Henry Ford had revolutionized car production, making them affordable for the middle class. Suddenly, millions of Americans had mobility they had never experienced. They could live far from work, travel on weekends, explore roads that multiplied across the country, and when they traveled, they needed to eat. Diners, with their compact format and flexible location, were perfectly positioned to meet this new demand. Establishments began appearing along highways, offering quick stops for hungry travelers. The concept of fast food was beginning to take shape, even though the term didn't yet exist. Anthony opened a second Moretti's location in 1928, strategically located at the Providence exit toward Boston. It was smaller than the original, focused on speed and practicality. The menu was simplified: hamburgers, French fries, drinks, and a few desserts. No elaborate dishes or lengthy meals. The goal was to serve the customer in less than 10 minutes and send them back on the road. This highway location was a laboratory for ideas that would become industry standards. Anthony experimented with car service, where servers took orders to parked vehicles. He experimented with disposable packaging that eliminated the need to wash dishes. He experimented with limited menus that sped up preparation. Then came the Great Depression. October 1929 marked the stock market crash and the beginning of the worst economic crisis in American history. Millions lost jobs, savings, hope. Businesses closed by the thousands. Families went hungry in a country that, just months before, had seemed destined for eternal prosperity. The Morettis survived, but barely. The highway location closed in 1931, unable to compete when no one had money to travel anymore. The original location reduced hours, cut employees, simplified the menu even further. Prices dropped. The hamburger that cost 30 cents was now sold for 15. Profit margins practically disappeared. Giuseppe, now 67 years old, worked alongside his son until the last months of his life. He died in 1933, exhausted but proud of having kept the business alive when so many others had failed. His last meal was a hamburger from his own diner, the same sandwich he had started selling 40 years earlier from a wooden wagon. The Depression, paradoxically, consolidated the place of diners in American culture. When people had little money, they needed places where they could eat satisfactorily without spending much. Elegant restaurants disappeared. Diners survived. The hamburger, cheap and nutritious, became the people's meal. Diners became democratic refuges where unemployed workers, broke travelers, and struggling families could sit side by side and share a dignified meal. The menu of that era reflected the need for maximum economy. Portions were smaller, ingredients simpler, prices at the limit of what was viable. But quality, at the best establishments, remained intact. It was a matter of survival. Customers who had only 15 cents to spend needed to feel it was worth it. Anthony Moretti guided the diner through the Depression with a simple philosophy: honest food, fair price, and never forget where we came from. When the economy began to recover in the late 1930s, Moretti's was positioned to grow again. And World War II, despite all its horror, would bring one last transformation that would define the American diner forever. The soldiers who returned from Europe and the Pacific missed home, and the taste of home, for millions of them, was the hamburger from the diner where they had spent their teenage years. Demand exploded. New establishments opened across the country, and a new generation of entrepreneurs looked at the diner model and thought, we can do this bigger, faster, more efficient. In 1948, two brothers in California named Richard and Maurice McDonald transformed their small restaurant into a revolutionary operation. They eliminated servers, simplified the menu to 9 items, created an assembly line for preparation, and reduced prices to levels never seen before. The hamburger cost 15 cents, French fries 10, milkshake 20. They called it the speedy service system. The world would call it fast food. Anthony Moretti, already 52 years old when the original McDonald's opened, watched this new competition with a mixture of admiration and concern. The McDonald brothers had taken everything traditional diners did and optimized it to the extreme. It was genius. It was also an existential threat, but Anthony decided not to compete in the same game. Moretti's diner would remain what it had always been, a place where people were served by name, where they could sit at the counter for hours chatting, where food was prepared with individual care. It wouldn't be the fastest. It wouldn't be the cheapest. It would be the most human. That decision saved the business. When fast food chains multiplied in the following decades, traditional diners found a new niche. They were the authentic alternative, the antidote to standardization. Customers who wanted more than a quick meal sought out diners for human connection, for nostalgia, for food made the old way. The Moretti's menu in 1960, when Anthony passed management to his own son, was both familiar and expanded. The classic hamburger was there, now at 75 cents. The cheeseburger at 85. The combo with French fries, $1.20. Milkshakes remained popular, and new items had been added: hot dogs, chicken sandwiches, salads for a growing health-conscious audience. But the spirit was the same as 1892, when Giuseppe parked his green wagon on the corner of an industrial street and began serving hungry workers. Today, Moretti's Diner still exists. The 5th generation of the family runs the establishment, which has been renovated, but retains the original marble counter Giuseppe installed over a century ago. The menu offers artisanal hamburgers at prices Giuseppe never could have imagined, but also maintains the classic Moretti at an accessible price in tribute to its origins. The history of the first American diners is, in essence, a story of immigration, hard work, and adaptation. These are stories of people like Giuseppe Moretti, who came to America with nothing and built something that fed generations. These are stories of innovation born from necessity, of hamburgers invented to satisfy exhausted workers, of milkshakes created to refresh travelers on dusty roads. The menu we now consider quintessentially American: breakfast with eggs and bacon, lunch with hamburger and French fries, dessert with apple pie and ice cream, was not invented in a corporate laboratory. It was developed organically over decades by thousands of small entrepreneurs responding to their customers' needs. From Walter Scott's wagon in 1872 to Moretti's Diner in 2024, a continuous line connects the first American diners to what we eat today. Ingredients have changed, prices have risen, techniques have evolved, but the essence remains: good food, fair price, and a place where anyone can sit and be fed. Giuseppe Moretti came to America seeking a better life. He found it selling hamburgers to night workers, and without knowing it, he helped create a culinary tradition that would feed the world. This is the true story of the menu of the first American diners. A story of hunger and abundance, of work and reward, of immigrants who became Americans one meal at a time. This journey through American culinary history has come to an end, but your learning can continue. If you were transported to those kitchens of the past, if you felt the smell of coffee and bacon crossing through time, subscribe to this channel right now. Leave your like and share with someone who loves a good story about food and tradition. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any journey through time. See you in the next video. And next time you eat a hamburger, remember, you're savoring more than a century of American history.